Temps.com today.
Well, let me say a word about President Biden's executive orders on oil and gas. They are immeasurably foolish. They're going to gut Louisiana like a fish. His war on oil and gas is going to hurt America.
It's not like nobody's going to produce oil. It's going to be a gift to countries like Russia, Venezuela.
Here's President Biden's new energy policy. We're not going to produce our own oil. Instead, we're going to buy oil from countries that hate us, so they'll have more money to buy weapons to try to kill us.
Wow, Space Force.
I always am going to interpret these protests as an essential component of evolution in our country.
Wow, Space Force.
Freedom prospers when religion is vibrant and the rule of law under God is acknowledged.
An informed patriot is what we want.
Welcome to American Family Radio's Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on conservative talk radio.
Muscular Christianity.
Where we relentlessly explore the intersection of truth and politics.
The trouble with our liberal friends is not that they're ignorant. It's just that they know so much that isn't so.
Now, here's your host, Bryan Fischer.
Howdy, and welcome to a brand new broadcast edition of Focal Point on American Family Radio. My name is Bryan Fischer, your congenial, convivial, amiable, and effervescent host.
As always.
Jeff and Bobby there to remind you of that, just in case you happen to forget. Anyway, good to have you in the conversation today. Remind you to get podcasts. You can get podcasts by going to afr.net. You can get podcasts by downloading a podcast app on your phone and subscribing to the Focal Point podcast. Get notified every day, never miss a program. You can also live stream us on both audio and video on our Focal Point Facebook page and on our YouTube channel. Email address, focalpoint@afa.net. Probably the best way to communicate with me, actually. Twitter, @BryanJFischer. Don't forget, on the afastore.net website, you can get a T-shirt, a Focal Point T-shirt. One of our listeners proudly displaying it on our Focal Point Facebook page today. And I don't know where mine went. I had it here. It's here, but I don't know where it went.
Oh, really?
So I'll be wearing it as soon as I can find it. So somewhere in the house, I know that.
Hey, maybe we should have people start sending in pictures with their Facebook and their Focal Point T-shirt on, and we'll post it on Facebook.
Yeah. Send it into our
honor or something.
Yeah,
you know?
Send it into our Focal Point Facebook page, and we'll put it up there. We already have one up there today. You can join the madding crowd. All right, let's turn our attention to the content of the day. I want to begin by opening us to the Word of God, which we customarily do, get our bearings from the nautical charts, which the Scriptures represent for the USS Focal Point. Now, we're in Job 8 and 9 today, picking up the continuing saga of Job. Now, another one of Job's friends weighs in. He's a guy by the name of Bildad, who also, by the way, a little piece of Bible trivia, was the shortest man in the Bible. How do we know that? His name is Bildad the Shuhite. You can work it out. So Bildad finally loses his patience with Job, and he says, man, what is coming out of your mouth is nothing but hot air and gas. That's the Bryan Fischer translation there. He says, how long will you say these things, and the words of your mouth be a great wind? Then he bores in on Job. He's using folk theology rather than biblical theology. One of the things we see in Job is the exposure of folk Christianity, of folk theology, what people think the Bible teaches about stuff, but isn't. It isn't what the Bible teaches about these things. So we're going to contrast folk theology with biblical theology today. So here's what Bildad says. Does God pervert justice? If your children have sinned against him, he has delivered them into the hand of their transgression. Now, this is just cold. This is actually brutal, what Bildad is saying here, because remember that all of Job's children and their families were gathered in one place, like for a Thanksgiving dinner or something like that, and the roof collapsed on them and killed them all. in one disaster. And so Bildad is bloviating this pious bilge. He says, look, that's your fault. If your kids sinned, that's on them. They have nobody to blame but themselves that the roof caved in on them and killed them all. And so Bildad is bloviating here against Job. He says, come on, Job, you got to come clean. Admit the sin you are hiding from us. Admit it, confess it, don't keep hiding it. And if you do, I can declare to you that God will go easy on you. In fact, God will bless you. He will rouse himself for you, restore your rightful habitation, and your latter days will be very great. Now, this might sound like good theology on the surface, but it was irrelevant because God himself had said Job was blameless, going all the way back to chapter 1. So these disasters were not the punishment for Job's secret sins. We have God's authority for that. And here Bildad suggests it is his kids' fault that the roof caved in. God had handed them over to their transgression, so they got exactly what they deserved. So according to folk theology, rather than biblical theology, if something bad happens to us, it's a punishment for our sin. But the point of Job is that bad things can happen to good people, not because they are secretly bad, but because God has a larger purpose in mind. That's biblical theology. We finally get to the larger purpose God had for Job toward the end of the book. But for now, the point is that God may allow disasters to come into our lives, not as a punishment for sin, but as a way to accomplish other things in our lives. You know, somebody one time asked Michelangelo, who sculpted the famous statue of David, he said, how did you create this masterpiece of a sculpture, which is the wonder of the art world? You start with a big pile of granite, big block of granite. How did you get down to what you wound up with? He said, well, it was easy. I just chipped away at everything that didn't look like David. That's what God's purpose is sometimes in suffering that we can't explain. It's his way of chipping away at everything in us that does not look like Christ. Now, Bildad's oblivious to all that. He goes on and says, look, this is real simple. If you got to have a marsh to grow papyrus, you got to have water to grow weeds, so you got to have sin to produce disaster and punishment. Don't worry, God's not stewed about you, Bildad goes on. Out of the soil others will spring. So don't worry, Job. God will make somebody else just like you, and he will use him in your place since you've disqualified yourself as a sorry sinner. So just be honest with us, Job, is what Bildad is saying. You do that, and in verse 20 and 21, God will not reject you, and he will yet fill your mouth with laughter. Now, Job responds to all this in chapter 9. He says, if what you're saying is true, Bildad, then it's going to be real bad for everybody. If you're right, then it's curtains for everybody in the world. How can a man, Job says, be in the right before God? If God wished to contend with him, one could not answer him once in 1,000 times. He is wise in heart and mighty in strength. So Job says, look, he's wrong about me. That's Job's position. God's wrong about me, but he's smarter than me, he's stronger than me, and he can out-argue me every time. No way, Job says, I can stand up against him. He's the one who removes mountains, who shakes the earth, who commands the sun, who all by himself stretched out the heavens, didn't need any help. He made the great constellations in the universe. He does things that nobody can figure out, great things beyond searching out. Nobody has the goods to stand up to him and say, what are you doing? So Job is about ready to give up the whole thing. God will not turn back his anger. He's just given up. God's got it in for me, and he's going to keep doing it till I'm finished. He gets ticked off at somebody, he stays ticked off. That's Job's view of God. So now we're back to folk theology. When God gets ticked at somebody, he stays ticked off at them. That's Job's view of God, and that too is an error. How then can I answer him? Though I am in the right, I cannot answer him. My only shot, he says, is his mercy. My only hope is to appeal to him, the one who is accusing me, for mercy. You ever been in a relationship with someone who just knew how to turn everything around on you? You're having a conversation, you're having a debate, and all of a sudden you find yourself mysteriously backed into a corner and you don't know how to defend yourself and you don't even know how you got there. That's how Job was feeling about God. Though I am in the right, he says, my own mouth would condemn me. Though I am blameless, he would prove me perverse, even though I am blameless. So Job ends this little speech by saying that God does not play fair. Again, folk theology. He destroys both the blameless and the wicked. And he's given the earth into the hand of the wicked. Everything's run by people who are corrupt and wicked and mean. And you can't even get justice in court, Job says, because God covers the faces of the judges so they can't see who's innocent and who's guilty. Well, on that cheery note, let's go to prayer. And don't forget, we are not nearly to the end of the dialogue between Job and God and Job and his friends. So let's go to prayer. And I want to remind you once again, this is a prayer that I've written. It's a personal prayer that I've written for someone who's going through unexplained suffering like Job was going through. It's in the first person. I will pray this by proxy for you. If you're going through a time of deep suffering, I'm sure I'm talking to people right now who are going through a period of suffering you can't explain. And this prayer is for you. I'm going to pray it in your place as proxy for you as I pray it. Identify yourself with the person who's speaking in this prayer, and together we will pray this back to God. Lord God, I humble myself before you as a God who is mighty in strength. You remove mountains. You shake the earth out of its place so that its pillars tremble. You command the sun and seal up the stars. You stretched out the heavens and trampled the waves of the sea. You made the great constellations we see in the night sky, the Bear and Orion and the Pleiades. You are a God who does great things beyond searching out and marvelous things beyond number. I also believe, Lord God, that you are wise in heart and that you are a God who does not pervert justice or pervert what is right. I choose to seek you and to plead with you for mercy, believing that if I am pure and upright, you will rouse yourself for me and restore me. I have hope that though my beginning is small, my latter days will be great. I choose to believe that you will not reject a blameless man, nor take the hand of evildoers. You will yet fill my mouth with laughter and my lips with shouting. Those who hate me will be clothed with shame. But it seems as if I have become the object of your anger, and that your anger is not turned away from me. You crush me with a tempest and multiply my wounds without cause. It seems as if you will not even let me catch my breath, and that you fill me with bitterness. I see no wrong in me that would explain the severity of your judgment against me. It seems as though you destroy both the blameless and the wicked. I do not know how to be in the right with you. I know that if I wished to contend with you, I could not answer you once in 1,000 times. Even though I summon you, it is as if you do not listen to my voice. It looks as if the earth is given into the hand of the wicked instead of into the hands of those who are blameless and in the right. Yet, Lord, I continue to seek you, and I will continue to seek you. I know that no one who has hardened himself against you has succeeded, and so I bow myself before you and appeal for mercy to you, my judge. In Jesus' name, amen. All righty, let's get back to content here as we move into the content of the day. I want to make you aware of a law that's being proposed in Denmark. It is a law that would require the transcription and prior approval of all sermons by the government. We'll be back.
Family Radio.
Howdy, and welcome back to Focal Point on American Family Radio, the home of muscular Christianity on Conservative Talk Radio. And now you can wear a T-shirt that has that message on it. Focal Point with Bryan Fischer, the home of muscular Christianity. Jeff?
Is it spelled like that?
Home.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got it all spelled out.
You know what? You'll be flattered because Abe even said that last night on his show. He said it just like you do. He was talking about having his first show on AFR when he filled in for you one day, and he said, the home. I need some work, but Abe did it pretty good.
Yeah, speaking of Abe, you may know the details better than me, Jeff, but Abe, our colleague here at AFR, got an award for Podcast of the Year or something like that.
Yeah, actually two of them. He for the year 2020 got the Best Video Podcast of the Year and the Best Commentary Award.
Okay.
He was actually invited to be a keynote speaker at the award ceremony, but he has some other obligations that he couldn't get rid of. So they sent him the award the other day, and he talked about it on his show. That's when he mentioned you.
Well, great. Well, congratulations to Abe. Both awards well deserved. Now, let me finish where I was going with the beginning of the end of the first segment about this new law that's being proposed in Denmark Now, this law is directed against Islam. Again, let me repeat. The law, which will probably pass, would require the transcription and prior approval of the manuscripts of all sermons that would be preached in Denmark by anyone speaking a language other than Danish. And this would be targeted at at sermons that are preached in mosques. Jeff, by the way, while I'm thinking of it, do you know who gave these awards to Abe? What organization?
Not offhand. It's I mean, I'd have to look on the award, but it's some media award.
Okay,
company.
all right.
I'll look it up.
Okay, well, good for Abe. That doesn't surprise me a bit that he got those awards. Okay, so you got to have your sermons pre-approved by the government in Denmark. Now, in America, this is a non-starter for the simple reason that the Constitution guarantees the free exercise of religion. You cannot require pastors to get approval from the government for their sermons or for the content of their sermons. That just completely violates the whole concept of the free exercise of religion, which is flatly prohibited to Congress. Congress can't do that. The federal government cannot do something like this. But here's the problem that they have in Denmark is they don't have a First Amendment. We've talked about this before, but the First Amendment, as Joseph Story makes clear, Joseph Story, who wrote the first comprehensive history of the Constitution, this is what Joseph Story said now. It's not what I'm saying. This is what Joseph Story said. He was appointed to the Supreme Court by James Madison in 1811, was the longest-serving associate justice in the 19th century. So if James Madison, who's the father of the Constitution, if he appointed Joseph Story to the bench, then you can believe that James Madison had confidence that Joseph Story knew what the Constitution was all about. And what Joseph Story said, when the founders enacted the First Amendment, they weren't even thinking about Mohammedanism. They weren't even thinking about Judaism. They weren't thinking about atheism. They were only thinking about Christianity. They were not countenancing. That means they weren't even dealing with. They weren't thinking about. They weren't talking about. They weren't debating these other religious traditions. So the First Amendment has nothing to do with Islam. It has nothing to do, even with Judaism. It has nothing to do with protecting atheism. It was exclusively about protecting Christianity in order, Joseph Story said, to exclude rivalry among the various Christian denominations. That was its purpose, to protect the free exercise of religion among the Christian denominations. Bottom line is that Islam does not have the First Amendment rights to the free exercise of religion. Now, states have total control under the Founders' Constitution, total control of regulating religious expression in their states. So if they wanted to have an established church in the state, they could. 10 states did. Time of the founding, there were 10 states that had established religions. Official Christian denomination, that was the official denomination of the state. People paid their taxes to it and were obligated and so forth to attend it and to support it. But Islam is not in that list. So states can do whatever they want. So if they want to have different rules for mosques than they do for churches, they can do it under the Founders' Constitution, not the one that's been warped by the Supreme Court. So anyway, now and in America, I want to hasten to add, in America, we have the presumption of freedom. We have the presumption of liberty. If you conduct yourself as a good citizen, you don't have anything to fear from the government in the United States. But if you hold to a totalitarian ideology and you promote it in your mosques, you don't have protection from the First Amendment of the Constitution. You might in your state constitution. That would be the place to look, because remember, regulating religious expression is no business of the federal government. Congress, and by extension the federal government, is completely prohibited. So their way of going about dealing with the danger of Islam a little bit of an overreach, and of course they've got a problem because they do not have a First Amendment. And this is another reason why understanding clearly what the meaning of the First Amendment as the founders gave it to us is so important. Now, I realize there may be nobody in America who agrees with me, and I'm only speaking on my behalf and on behalf of Joseph Story, who wrote the first magisterial history of the Constitution. So I'm speaking on his behalf because I got this from him. So the First Amendment was not written to protect the exercise of any other religion except for Christianity, and its purpose was to exclude competition, to exclude rivalry among the various sects in America's life. All right, Jeff?
By the way, I looked up the who gave Abe the awards for Best Video Podcast of the Year and Best Commentary. It's actually from the Film Festival and Media Summit called Content 2020 in their News and Journalism category. So,
okay, great. Well,
Film
good
and
for our
Festival
colleague
Media
and friend
Summit.
Abe Hamilton. What's that, Jeff?
Yeah, the Film and Festival and Media Summit is the awarder of these. There's some pretty good. He's in pretty good company. I mean, some of the other awards here are some really big names that people would know. So, I mean, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, that is. Good for Abe. You know, we talk a lot of times about racism and the way that the concept of racism has been completely messed up by the left, by the cultural left. And if you're looking for systemic racism, remember, all the left can talk about is systemic racism. Everywhere they look, they see systemic racism. It's just woven into the systems. That's not exist. It doesn't exist. There is no systemic racism in America, in our police department, in our laws. There is, however, systemic racism in our public system of education. It is embedded in our education. So if you're looking for systemic racism, the place to find it is in public education. Now, here's an example from San Francisco. They have a high school there, Lowell High School, which is the premier high school in the city of San Francisco. And you only get in by applying and being admitted. And the way you get admitted is by having top-notch GPA and by producing an excellent score on their admissions exam. Sounds good, right? So the best students, the smartest students in San Francisco can go to this one high school where they bring together the brightest and the best and educate them for college and for the rest of their lives. Now, here is the deal. They've quit that kind of open admissions policy. It's no longer available, no longer an application and screening process. So now they've gotten rid of all that completely. There's no entrance kind of requirements. Why? Because too many Asian students were getting into Lowell High School, and not enough people with different skin colors were getting in to the school. So they are now actively discriminating systematically, just like Harvard is doing, systematically discriminating against Asian students on the basis of the color of their skin. So if you're looking for systemic racism, that's where you will find it in San Francisco public school system. Now, one quick item. Hillary Clinton saying we've got to protect abortion. She said, quote, for our grandkids. You know, everybody says we got to do this for the children. So Hillary Clinton says we got to do it for the sake of our grandchildren. Well, if people take abortion seriously, they're not going to be any grandchildren. They will all have been sacrificed to the demons before they ever get to draw their first breath. She says we got to do this so they can live up to their God-given potential. Well, my response to that is, how can you live up to your God-given potential if you're dead, if you never get to draw your first breath? Hillary not addressing that particular question. So, how do you live up to your God-given potential if you never even get to breathe? Now, looking at Talking Snake Media just for a moment, this I find pretty interesting. You know, everything is driven by hatred of Donald Trump, including people who watch CNN. They watch CNN because they know that that's where they can go to feed their hatred of Donald Trump. And we saw when Fox started going to the center, they lost their audience. They fell behind MSNBC. They fell behind CNN day in and day out. Now they're starting to get a little bit of their mojo back, but it's because they're recapturing their commitment to conservative principles. Some of that is coming back. But CNN, the week after, this is crazy, the first week after Trump, their ratings dropped by 44%. Chris Cuomo's prime time was hit the hardest. He lost more than half of his listening audience in 1 week. Fox, meanwhile, the only program on Fox News that held its own was Tucker Carlson tonight. They actually showed a slight increase over the final Trump week. Now, Twitter has blacklisted MyPillow, Mike Lindell, and not just blacklisted him, not just his personal account, but they have blacklisted the corporate Twitter account of MyPillow. It's interesting, and so people are protesting. This is an interesting idea. I never thought about this before, and trust me, I'm not recommending this. I just find this an interesting news item. Earlier this week, people knowing about how Kohl's and Bed Bath & Beyond have canceled MyPillow supplies. They won't sell them in their stores anymore. And they're trying to say, well, it's because demand has dried up. I'm not believing that for 1 minute. But a group of conservative activists in Larkspur, California, they protested at a Bed Bath & Beyond. What they did is they shopped peacefully throughout the store. They filled up their carts, and then they abandoned them in the store without purchasing any items. And they left notes in the carts explaining why they had done it. Please, they said on these notes, don't participate in cancel culture. And as I have said before, it's not cancel culture, it's obliteration culture. The left wants to wipe conservatives completely off the map. So that's kind of a clever approach to kind of the, it's not a boycott really. It's a load your cart up effort. Ron DeSantis, by the way, this is a guy to keep your eyes on for 2024. He's the governor of Florida, and he is sponsoring new legislation, been talking about it on the media, to rein in big tech. Now, here are some of the regulations that they're proposing for the state of Florida. Mandatory opt-outs from big tech's content filters. They have to offer you a way to opt out of their content filters. If they don't, they can fine you, put you out of business. There is a private right of action for Floridian citizens against tech companies that violate this condition. So they can take them to court. You know, we're talking here about Google, we're talking about Facebook, we're talking about Twitter, all the main Instagram, all the main social media outlets. And the companies that suspend the candidates for elected office from their platforms will be fined $100,000 per day. So Twitter's not going to be allowed to cancel a candidate for office unless they're willing to pay $100,000 a day for the privilege. And there will be daily fines for any tech company that tries to use algorithms to suppress or prioritize the access of any content related to a political candidate or a cause on the ballot. And the Florida Attorney General would be empowered under the statute to bring cases against tech companies. So again, I think Ron DeSantis may be a guy to keep in mind. I still like Ted Cruz for 2024, but it looks like Ron DeSantis is a guy that's also getting it done. All right. Oh, and another news on the Talking Snake Media. You might have heard that Jeff Bezos is going into retirement. The guy that is replacing him was the boss of Amazon Web Services. That's Andy Jassy. I mean, Amazon is just making an absolute insane amount of money right now, like billions and billions and billions of dollars. It's crazy how much money Amazon is making while they are putting mom and pop operations out of business. Right and left, mom and pop businesses cannot compete. Now, here's the deal. The guy that's taken over Twitter is the guy that was running their web services. This is the guy that blacked out Parler. So we're not going to be any better off with the new guy. New boss, same as the old. Be right back. American media. Great to have you in the conversation with us. Let's turn our attention to some sound bites, see if we can wedge them in. By the way, the Democrats are already trying to work on passing a $1.9 trillion spending bill without any help from Republicans. No bipartisanship, nobody crossing the aisle to vote. They're going to do it completely without the Republicans. Remember, they've got 50 senators. Kamala Harris got the tie-breaking vote. They can do whatever they want as long as the Democrat caucus binds together, and stays together. Nothing the Republicans could do to stop it. Now, speaking of the president, let's go to clip number 1. This is Jen Psaki talking yesterday, or maybe it was the day before, and she's talking here about a branch of the United States military. The Space Force is a branch of the United States military. And Jen Psaki, the president's spokesman, mocks it. Let's listen. Clip number 1.
Ask whether the president has made a decision on keeping the scope of Space Force.
Wow, Space Force. It's the plane of today. It is an interesting question. I am happy to check with our Space Force point of contact. I'm not sure who that is. I will find out and see if we have any update on that.
Okay. Wow, Space Force. It's like the Jetsons. You know, and you know what that tells me is these people are just not serious people. This whole thing is just a game to them. Politics is a game, even though people's lives are getting damaged, careers are being ruined, jobs are being lost, businesses are being shut down. It's all a game to them. By the way, in California, Governor Newsom, his approval rating is dropping completely through the basement. He's now in the sub-basement, down to like 31% approval rating. This is a guy that wanted to go into the White House and then, you know, wanted to be president of the United States one day. He's a young guy, 53, could still do it. It's possible, but he is shooting himself right in the kneecap with all of these COVID restrictions that he doesn't bother to follow his own self. Now, here's Joe Biden. Speaking of fiscal sanity, Joe Biden, this is a few years ago, but this is the mindset of Democrats. When you listen to Joe Biden here, this is the way that Democrats think. That's why I say these are not serious people. These are not people whose brains are engaged in the business of public policy. Clip number 2.
Now, people say, when I say that, people look at me and say, what are you talking about, Joe? You're telling me we got to go spend money to keep from going bankrupt? The answer, yeah, that's what I'm telling you.
Oh, man. So we got to spend money to keep from going broke. So Joe Biden, he believes that the secret of getting out of debt is not being frugal, not being reasonable, not being smart, not exercising some self-restraint, but spending more money. We're just going to spend our way right out of this debt that we are in. And we are in a monster debt. You get through with the Biden budget, our national debt is going to be twice the size of our entire economy. In other words, if we shut down all government spending and we threw everything that our economy was worth, threw it all into debt reduction, we could only get halfway there in 1 year, and we'd have nothing else in this country. All right, now the impeachment is coming up here. By the way, on the environmental front, let me mention this while we're at New York, as you may have seen, digging out from its biggest blizzard in 5 years. And Governor Cuomo made a big deal. I mean, he was out there saying, this snowstorm is so bad, you guys have to stay home. I order everybody in New York, don't drive, stay home. It's too risky out there. And what does Governor Cuomo do right after he has that press conference? He gets in his car and he drives 2.5 hours to Albany, from Albany, New York to New York City. Now, this is your catastrophic global warming alert for the day. New York is digging out of its biggest blizzard in 5 years. You know, if we have this catastrophic global warming coming at us, John Kerry is saying we've got 9 years now where this thing is going to eat us up. It's going to be too late. If catastrophic global warming is a thing, how come we don't see any catastrophic global warming? Why are we getting these blizzards in New York? Worst one in 5 years. By the way, speaking of recycling, Portland is going to have to destroy its recycling plant in order to resave the planet. This is from the Wall Street Journal. Portland declared a climate emergency last year, and the city council voted to achieve net zero CO2 emissions by 2050. To meet this goal that would have zero effect on the climate, in fact, I don't know who it was the other day, I think John Kerry admitted that if we reduced our climate emissions to zero, it wouldn't do any good because 90% of the world is still going to be belching out that stuff into the atmosphere, which doesn't harm the environment to begin with. There's no catastrophic global warming, and carbon emissions don't have a material effect on the sustainability of the planet. So what Portland is going to do is they are going to impose $11 million in annual fees on city businesses. Now, facilities that are deemed major stationary sources of pollution will pay an annual surcharge of up to $40,000, and they impose a per-ton fee on any facility that emits more than 2,500 metric tons of CO2 a year. Well, Portland's Owens Brockway glass container plant handles all of the state's glass bottle recycling, processes the equivalent of 440,000 beer bottles a day on average. How would you like to start singing that song?
No.
440,000 bottles of beer on the one and count down. That'd be an all-day sucker. But if the city council adopts this proposal, the bottling plant would have to pay $1.1 million a year to the city of Portland. It already pays $1.6 million a year in income, real estate, and property taxes. It's got 115 employees. The tax contributions, they'd have to shut this thing down. There's no way it could stay open with that kind of tax burden. So in order to save the planet, Portland is going to shut down their main recycling center. Now, Bjorn Lomborg is a guy that's a wizard on this environmental global warming stuff. And he says, John Kerry, Joe Biden signed up again for the Paris Climate Accords. Joe Biden's out there touting it. And here, Bjorn Lomborg, who is saying that if the Paris Agreement was fully implemented, it would lower global temperatures. That sounds good. You know how much it would lower global temperatures? By 0.05 degrees. Not by 1 degree, not by 1/2 a degree, but by 0.05 degrees Fahrenheit. And reality, that Lomborg makes the point that our CO2 emissions levels are going down in the United States. Most people don't know that because the mainstream media will not tell you this. And the reason they're going down, the reason that our carbon emissions are going down is that we have shifted to natural gas. Now, the people on the left are trying to demonize natural gas. It's bad for the planet. That's why we have been cutting our global emissions or our national emissions. And, of course, they want solar and wind. What's the problem with solar and wind? Well, solar facilities produce no energy when the sun isn't shining, which is like, what, half the time? And with regard to wind, there's no wind energy unless there's wind blowing. So you have to rely on a very intermittent source of energy. All right, well, let's get a couple of more sound bites in. Got the impeachment trial of President Trump going to start here in about a week. And here is a video, citizen video you probably didn't see. This is on January 6th. This is on the steps of the Capitol. There is a guy that's wearing a Trump 45 hat, big, bright red cap, wearing it on his head, and the camera at one point shifts and you can see the Capitol Police standing there, leaning up against the building, doing nothing. No sense of urgency. In fact, you almost wonder if Nancy Pelosi, remember, she's in charge of the Capitol Police. What if Nancy Pelosi told these guys, stay out of this thing? We want this thing to be a mess. We want chaos. We want destruction because it's useful for our purposes. Anyway, they're standing there doing nothing. And here's this guy, a pro-Trump guy, and here's what he's saying to these cops. Remember, and the chaos and the property damage had already begun. And here's what he's saying to these Capitol Police. Clip 3.
Why are you letting this happen? Why haven't you called for backup? Where is your backup? This is our Capitol building, and y'all are letting it get destroyed on your watch. Call for backup. Get some help down here.
Okay, he's pleading with these cops because the destruction had already started and they were not doing anything. They were standing there with their arms folded, leaning up against the side of the building, not doing anything. And the guy's pointing over to these people that are starting to crash into the Capitol building, and he's yelling at these cops, why are you letting this happen? Because he could clearly see they were not interested in stopping it. They were letting the chaos play out. You need to call for backup. Why haven't you called for backup? You've got to get some backup down here. Now, that's from a Trump supporter, so you're not going to hear anything about that from the talking snake media. Now, clip number 4 with the impeachment coming up, and remember the impeachment against Donald Trump. He's what accused of is inciting a riot, inciting insurrection by his speech at the rally before they started breaking into the Capitol. And Lindsey Graham is talking to the Democrats who are going to be running the whole impeachment thing. And Lindsey Graham has a warning for these Democrats about the impeachment process. Clip 4.
But if you open up that can of worms, we'll want the FBI to come in and tell us about how people actually pre-planned these attacks and what happened with the security footprint at the Capitol. You open up Pandora's box if you call one witness. I hope we don't call any and we vote and get this trial over next week when it starts.
So Lindsey Graham saying, look, if the Democrats call witnesses in this impeachment trial, if they call anybody to be part of the prosecution of the case against Donald Trump, we are going to open Pandora's box. We are going to bring the FBI in here, and we're going to ask the FBI to tell us what they discovered about the pre-planning of this event. Remember, on social media, on Facebook, by the way, Zuckerberg's Facebook platform, so maybe they ought to be prosecuted for having a part in this, being a collaborator or a co-conspirator or something. But what Lindsey Graham is saying, we're going to call the FBI to come in and tell us everything they discovered about the pre-planning that went in to this thing. And the Democrats, you're not going to like it, because remember, the riot started before Donald Trump's speech was over. His 25-minute walk there, and the riot had started before he was even done speaking. The riot had started long before anybody had time to walk from the speech to the Capitol, pre-planned, pre-organized, and they rioted on cue. Now, Kamala Harris has a different view, apparently, if she's being consistent with what happened at the Capitol. This is Kamala Harris, and of course, she's talking about Black Lives Matter. But remember, when they riot, when they destroy property, that's fine. That's a peaceful protest. It's only when people who support Trump do rowdy things that they get in trouble. Here's Kamala Harris talking about her view of BLM protests with fires, with people being knocked out on the street, with windows being broken, stores being pillaged. Clip 5.
That we have achieved in our country that has been about progress, in particular around civil rights, has come without a fight. And so I always am going to interpret these protests as an essential component of evolution in our country.
An essential component. So Kamala Harris says, look, this is my view. These riots, they're an essential component of our quest for democracy. So let's apply that to what happened on January 6th. Nothing we have achieved in this country that has been about progress, in particular around civil rights, which would include the right to vote, has come without a fight. So I'm going to interpret this protest, Kamala Harris says, as an essential component of evolution in our country, an essential component or the mark of a real democracy. That was Kamala Harris then, slightly different tune today. Well, I think it's about it for today. I've got a couple of environmental clips I want to get to that you'll want to hear, but come back tomorrow and we'll be sure and play them for you. Ralph Warnock, the guy that won the runoff election for Senate in Georgia, by the way, is trying to shame the Republicans into not passing voting reform. What they have done is they are proposing a bill in Georgia that would do away, let me get to the right sheet here, that would do away with, well, I'm lost my place here, and I'm out of time. Come back. So that'll give you another reason to come back tomorrow. Hear the rest of that story. Yep. Bow low before God, stand tall before men. Never forget, we are fighting a winnable war. See you tomorrow.